They said nothing on their way back to the firehouse. Nobody looked at anyone else. Montag sat in the front seat with Beatty and Black. They don't even smoke their pipes. They sat there, looking out at the front of the great salamander as they turned a corner and went silently on. "Master Ridley," said Montag at last. "What?" said Beatty. "She said, Master Ridley. She said some crazy thing when we came in the door. Play the man, she said. Master Ridley, something, something, something. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out," said Beatty. Stoneman glanced over at the captain, as did Montag, startled. Beatty rubbed his chin. "A man named Latimer said that to a man named Nicholas Ridley as they were being burnt alive at Oxford for heresy in October 16th, 1555. Montag and Stoneman went back to looking at the street as it moved under the engine wheels. "I'm full of bits and pieces," said Beatty. "Most fire captains have to be. Sometimes I surprise myself. Oh, watch it, Stoneman!" Stoneman braked the truck. "Oh, damn," said Beatty. "You've gone right by the corner where we turned for the firehouse." "Who is it?" "Who would it be?" said Montag, leaning back against the closed room in the dark. His wife said at last, "Well, put on the light." "I don't want the light." "Come to bed." He heard her roll impatiently. The bed springs squealed. "Are you drunk?" she said. So it was the hand that started it all. He felt one hand and then the other work his coat free and let it slump to the floor. He held his pants out into an abyss and let them fall into darkness. His hands had been infected, and soon it would be his arms. He could feel the poison working up his wrists and into his elbows and his shoulders, and then the jump over from shoulder blade to shoulder blade like a spark leaping a gap. His hands were ravenous, and his eyes were beginning to feel hunger, as if they must look at something, anything, everything. His wife said, "What are you doing?" He balanced in space with the book in his sweating cold fingers. A minute later she said, "Well, don't just stand there in the middle of the floor." He made a small sound. "What?" she asked. He made more soft sounds. He stumbled towards the bed and shoved the book clumsily under the cold pillow. He fell into bed and his wife cried out, startled. He lay far across the room from her, on a winter island separated by an empty sea. She talked to him for what seemed a long while, and she talked about this, and she talked about that, and it was only words, like the words he'd heard once in a nursery at a friend's house, a 2-year-old child building word patterns, talking jargon, making pretty sounds in the air. But Montag said nothing, and after a long while, when he only made small sounds, he felt her move in the room and come to his bed and stand over him and put her hand down to feel his cheek. He knew that when she pulled her hand away from his face, it was wet. Late in the night he looked over at Mildred. She was awake. There was a tiny dance of melody in the air. Her seashell was tamped in her ear again, and she was listening to far people in far places, her eyes wide and staring at the fathoms of blackness above her in the ceiling. Wasn't there an old joke about the wife who talked so much on the telephone that her desperate husband ran out to the nearest store and telephoned her to ask what was for dinner? Well then, why didn't he buy himself an audio seashell broadcasting station and talk to his wife late at night? Murmur, whisper, shout, scream, yell. But what would he whisper? What would he yell? What could he say? And suddenly she was so strange he couldn't believe he knew her at all. He was in someone else's house, like those other jokes people told of the gentleman, drunk, coming home late at night, unlocking the wrong door, entering a wrong room, bedding with a stranger, and getting up early, going to work, and neither of them the wiser. "Milly," he whispered. "What?" "Oh, I didn't mean to startle you. What I want to know—" "Well, when did we meet and where?" "When did we meet for what?" she asked. "I mean, originally." He knew she must be frowning in the dark. He clarified it. The first time we ever met, where was it and when? Why, it was at... She stopped. Why, I don't know, she said. He was cold. Can't you remember? It's been so long. Only 10 years, that's all, only 10. Don't get excited, I'm trying to think. And she laughed, an odd little laugh that went up and up. Funny, how funny not to remember. Where or when you met your husband or wife? He lay massaging his eyes, his brow, and the back of his neck slowly. He held both hands over his eyes and applied a steady pressure there, as if to crush memory into place. It was suddenly more important than any other thing in a lifetime that he knew where he had met Mildred. It doesn't matter. She was up in the bathroom now, and he heard the water running and the swallowing sound she made. No, I guess not, he said. He tried to count how many times she swallowed, and he thought of the visit from the two zinc oxide-faced men with the cigarettes in their straight-lined mouths, and the electronic-eyed snake winding down into the layer upon layer of night and stone and stagnant spring water, and he wanted to call out to her, "How many have you taken tonight? The capsules. How many will you take later and not know?" And so on, every hour, or maybe not tonight, tomorrow night, and me not sleeping tonight or tomorrow night or any night for a long while, now this has all started. And he thought of her lying on the bed, with the two technicians standing straight over her, not bent with concern, but only standing straight, arms folded. And he remembered thinking then that if she died, he was certain he wouldn't cry. For it would be the dying of an unknown, a street face, a newspaper image. And it was suddenly so very wrong that he had begun to cry. Not at death, but at the thought of not crying at death. A silly, empty man near a silly, empty woman, while the hungry snake made her still more empty. How do you get so empty? He wondered. Who takes it out of you? And that awful flower the other day, the dandelion, it had summed up everything, hadn't it? What a shame. You're not in love with anyone. And why not? Well, wasn't there a wall between him and Mildred when you came down to it? Literally not just one wall, but so far 3. And expensive too. And the uncles, aunts and cousins, the nieces, the nephews that lived in those walls, the gibbering pack of tree apes that said nothing, 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 and said it loud, loud, loud. He'd taken to calling them relatives from the very first. How's Uncle Louis today? Who? And Aunt Maud. The most significant memory he had of Mildred, what really, was of a little girl in a forest without trees. How odd. Or rather, a little girl lost on a plateau where there used to be trees. You could feel the memory of their shapes all about. Sitting in the centre of the living room. The living room. What a good job of labelling that was now. No matter when he came in, the walls were always talking to Mildred. Something must be done. Yes, something must be done. Well, let's not stand and talk. Let's do it. I'm so mad I could spit. What was it all about? Mildred couldn't say. Who was mad at whom? Mildred didn't quite know. What were they going to do? Well, said Mildred, wait around and see. He had waited around to see. A great thunderstorm of sound gushed from the walls. Music bombarded him at such an immense volume that his bones were almost shaken from their tendons. He felt his jaw vibrate, his eyes wobble in his head. He was a victim of concussion. When it was all over, he felt like a man who had been thrown from a cliff, whirled in a centrifuge, and spat out over a waterfall that fell and fell into emptiness and never quite touched bottom. Never quite, no, not quite touched bottom. And you fell so fast, you didn't touch the sides either. Never quite touched anything. The thunder faded. The music died. There, said Mildred. And it was indeed remarkable. Something had happened. Even though the people in the walls of the room had barely moved, and nothing had really been settled, you had the impression that someone had turned on a washing machine or sucked you up in a giant vacuum. You drowned in music and pure cacophony. He came out of the room sweating and on the point of collapse. Behind him, Mildred sat in her chair, and the voices went on again. "Well, everything will be all right now," said an aunt. "Oh, don't be too sure," said a cousin. "Now, don't get angry. You are. I am. You're mad. Why should I be mad?" "Because that's all very well," cried Montag, "but what are they mad about? Who are these people? Who's that man and who's that woman? Are they husband and wife? Are they divorced, engaged? What? Good God, nothing's connected up." "They," said Mildred, "well, they had this fight, you see. They certainly fight a lot. You should listen. I think they're married. Yes, they're married." "Why?" And if it was not the 3 walls, soon to be 4 walls, and the dream complete, then it was the open car and Mildred driving 100 miles an hour across town, he shouting at her, and she shouting back, and both trying to hear what was said, but hearing only the scream of the car. "At least keep it down to the minimum," he yelled. "What?" she cried. "Keep it down to 55, the minimum," he shouted. "The what?" she shrieked. "Speed," he shouted, and she pushed it up to 105 miles an hour and tore the breath from his mouth. When they stepped out of the car, she had the seashells stuffed in her ears. Silence. Only the wind blowing softly. "Mildred," he stirred in bed. He reached over and pulled one of the tiny musical insects out of her ear. "Mildred, Mildred." "Yes." Her voice was faint. He felt he was one of the creatures electronically inserted between the slots of the phono-coloured walls, speaking, but the speech not piercing the crystal barrier. He could only pantomime, hoping she'd turn his way and see him. They had not touched through the glass. "Mildred, do you know that girl I was telling you about?" "What girl?" She was almost asleep. "The girl next door." "What girl next door?" "You know, the high school girl, Clarice, her name is." "Oh, yes," said his wife. "I haven't seen her for a few days, 4 days to be exact. Have you seen her?" "No." "I meant to talk to you about her. Strange." "Oh, I know the one you mean." "I thought you would." "Ah," said Mildred in the dark room. "What about her?" asked Montag. "I meant to tell you. Forgot. Yeah, forgot." "Well, tell me now. What is it?" "I think she's gone." "Gone?" "Whole family moved out somewhere, but she's gone for good. I think she's dead." We couldn't be talking about the same girl. "No, the same girl. McClellan, run over by a car 4 days ago. I'm not sure, but I think she's dead. The family moved out anyway. I don't know, but I think she's dead." "You're not sure of it?" No, not sure. Pretty sure." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I forgot." 4 days ago? I forgot all about it." 4 days ago, he said quietly, lying there. They lay in the dark room, not moving, either of them. "Good night," she said. He heard a faint rustle. Her hands moved. The electric thimble moved like a praying mantis on the pillow, touched by her hand. Now it was in her ear again, humming. He listened, and his wife was singing under her breath. Outside the house, a shadow moved. An autumn wind rose up and faded away, but there was something else in the silence that he heard. It was like a breath exhaled upon the window. It was like a faint drift of greenish luminescent smoke, the motion of a single huge October leaf blowing across the lawn and away. The hound, he thought. It's out there tonight. It's out there now. If I opened the window. He did not open the window. He had chills and fever in the morning. "You can't be sick," said Mildred. He closed his eyes over the hotness. "Yes." "But you were all right last night." "No, I wasn't all right." He heard the relatives shouting in the parlour. Mildred stood over his bed curiously. He felt her there. He saw her without opening his eyes, her hair burnt by chemicals to a brittle straw, her eyes with a kind of cataract unseen but suspect far behind the pupils, the reddened pouting lips. the body as thin as a praying mantis from dieting, and her flesh like white bacon. He could remember her no other way. "Will you bring me aspirin and water?" "You've got to get up," she said. "It's noon. You've slept 5 hours later than usual." "Will you turn the parlour off?" he asked. "Oh, that's my family." "Will you turn it off for a sick man?" "I'll turn it down." She went out of the room and did nothing to the parlour and came back. "Is that better?" "Thanks." "That's my favourite programme," she said. "And what about the aspirin?" "You've never been sick before?" She went away again. "Well, I'm sick now. I'm not going to work tonight. Call Beatty for me." "You acted funny last night." She returned, humming. "Where's the aspirin?" He glanced at the water glass she handed him. "Oh!" She walked to the bathroom again. "Did something happen?" "A fire is all." "I had a nice evening," she said, in the bathroom. "What doing?" "The parlour." "What was on?" "Programmes." "What programmes?" "Oh, some of the best ever." "Who?" "Oh, you know, the bunch." "Yes, the bunch, the bunch, the bunch." He pressed at the pain in his eyes, and suddenly the odour of kerosene made him vomit. Mildred came in, humming. She was surprised. "Why'd you do that?" He looked with dismay at the floor. "We burned an old woman with her books." "It's a good thing the rug's washable." She fetched a mop and worked on it. "I went to Helen's last night." "Couldn't you get the shows in your own parlour?" "Sure, but it's nice visiting." She went out into the parlour. He heard her singing. "Mildred!" he called. She returned, singing, snapping her fingers softly. "Aren't you going to ask me about last night?" he said. "What about it?" "We burned 1,000 books. We burned a woman." "Well?" The parlour was exploding with sound. "We burned copies of Dante and Swift and Marcus Aurelius." "Wasn't he a European?" "Something like that." "Wasn't he a radical?" "I never read him." "He was a radical." Mildred fiddled with the telephone. "You don't expect me to call Captain Beatty, do you?" "You must." "Don't shout." I wasn't shouting. He was up in bed suddenly, enraged and flushed, shaking. The parlour roared in the hot air. "I can't call him. I can't tell him I'm sick." "Why?" "Because you're afraid," he thought. A child feigning illness, afraid to call, because after a moment's discussion the conversation would run so: "Yes, Captain, I feel better already. I'll be in at 10 o'clock tonight." "You're not sick," said Mildred. Montag fell back in bed. He reached under his pillow. The hidden book was still there. "Mildred, how would it be if, well, maybe I quit my job a while?" "You want to give up everything after all these years of working because one night some woman and her books—" "You should have seen her, Emily." "She's nothing to me. She shouldn't have had books. It was her responsibility. She should have thought of that. I hate her. She's got you going, and next thing you know, we'll be out. No house, no job, nothing." "You weren't there. You didn't see," he said. "There must be something in books, things we can't imagine, to make a woman stay in a burning house. There must be something there. You don't stay for nothing." "She was simple-minded." "She was as rational as you and I, more so perhaps. And we burned her." "Oh, that's water under the bridge." "No, not water, fire. You ever seen a burned house? It smoulders for days. Well, this fire'll last me the rest of my life. God, I've been trying to put it out in my mind all night. I'm crazy with trying." "You should have thought of that before becoming a fireman." "Thought," he said. "Was I given a choice? My grandfather and father were firemen. In my sleep I ran after them." The parlour was playing a dance tune. "This is the day you go on the early shift," said Mildred. "You should have gone 2 hours ago. I just noticed." "It's not just the woman that died," said Montag. "Last night I thought about all the kerosene I've used in the past 10 years, and I thought about books, and for the first time I realised that a man was behind each one of the books. A man had to think them up. A man had to take a long time to put them down on paper. And I'd never even thought of that thought before. He got out of bed. It took some man a lifetime, maybe, to put some of his thoughts down, looking around at the world and life, and then I came along in 2 minutes, and boom, it's all over. "Oh, let me alone," said Mildred. "I didn't do anything." "Let you alone? That's all very well, but how can I leave myself alone? We need not to be let alone. We need to be really bothered once in a while. How long is it since you were really bothered about something important, about something real?" And then he shut up, for he remembered last week, and the 2 white stones staring up at the ceiling, and the pump snake with the probing eye, and the 2 soap-faced men with their cigarettes moving in their mouths while they talked. But that was another Mildred. That was a Mildred so deep inside this one, and so bothered, really bothered, that the 2 women had never met. He turned away. Mildred said, "Well, now you've done it. Out front of the house, look who's here." "I don't care." "There's a Phoenix car just driven up and a man in a black shirt with an orange snake stitched on his arm coming up the front walk." "Captain Beatty?" he said. "Captain Beatty." Montag did not move, but stood looking into the cold whiteness of the wall immediately before him. "Go let him in, will you? Tell him I'm sick." "Tell him yourself." She ran a few steps this way, a few steps that, and stopped, eyes wide, when the front door speaker called her name, softly, softly. "Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone here, Mrs. Montag, someone's here," fading. Montag made sure the book was well hidden behind the pillow, climbed slowly back into bed, arranged the covers over his knees, and crossed across his chest, half sitting, and after a while Mildred moved and went out of the room, and Captain Beatty strolled in, his hands in his pockets. "Shut the relatives up," said Beatty, looking around at everything except Montag and his wife. This time Mildred ran. The yammering voices stopped yelling in the parlour. Captain Beatty sat down in the most comfortable chair, with a peaceful look on his ruddy face. He took time to prepare and light his brass pipe and puff out a great smoke cloud. "Just thought I'd come by and see how the sick man is." "How did you guess?" Beatty smiled his smile, which showed the candy pinkness of his gums and the tiny candy whiteness of his teeth. "I've seen it all. You were going to call for a night off." Montag sat in bed. "Well," said Beatty, "take the night off." He examined his eternal matchbox, the lid of which said, "Guaranteed 1,000,000 lights in this igniter," and began to strike the chemical match abstractedly. Blow out, strike, speak a few words, blow out. He looked at the flame. He blew. He looked at the smoke. "When will you be well?" "Tomorrow. The next day, maybe. First of the week." Beatty puffed his pipe. "Every fireman, sooner or later, hits this. They only need understanding to know how the wheels run, need to know the history of our profession. They don't feed it to rookies like they used to. Damn shame." Puff. "Only fire chiefs remember it now." Puff. "I'll let you in on it." Mildred fidgeted. Beatty took a full minute to settle himself in and think back for what he wanted to say. "When did it all start, you ask, this job of ours? How did it come about? Where? When? Well, I'd say it really got started around about a thing called the Civil War, even though our rule book claims it was founded earlier. The fact is, we didn't get along well until photography came into its own. Then, motion pictures, in the early 20th century, radio, television, things began to have mass." Montag sat in bed, not moving. "And because they had mass, they became simpler," said Beatty. "Once books appealed to a few people, here, there, everywhere. They could afford to be different. The world was roomy. But then the world got full of eyes and elbows and mouths. Double, triple, quadruple population, films and radios, magazines, books levelled down to a sort of paste pudding norm. Do you follow me?" "Well, I think so." Beatty peered at the smoke pattern he had put out on the air. Picture it. 19th century man with his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion. Then in the 20th century, speed up your camera. Books cut shorter, condensations, digests, tabloids. Everything boils down to the gag, the snappy ending. Snap ending, Mildred nodded. Classics cut to fit 15-minute radio shows, then cut again to fill a 2-minute book column, winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I exaggerate, of course. The dictionaries were for reference, but many were those whose sole knowledge of Hamlet— you know the title, certainly, Montag? It is probably only a faint rumour of a title to you, Mrs. Montag— whose sole knowledge, as I say, of Hamlet was one-page digest in a book that claimed, now at last you can read all the classics, keep up with your neighbours. Do you see? Out of the nursery, into the college, and back to the nursery. There's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries or more. Mildred arose and began to move around the room, picking things up and putting them down. Beatty ignored her and continued. Speed up the film, Montag. Quick, quick, click, pick, look, I, now, flick, here, there, swift, peace, up, down, in, out, why, how, who, what, where, bang, smack, wallop, bing, bang, boom. Digests. Politics? 1 column, 2 sentences, a headline. Then in mid-air, all vanishes. Well, man's mind around, so fast under the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasters, that the centrifuge flings off all unnecessary, time-wasting thought. Mildred smoothed the bedclothes. Montag felt his heart jump, and jump again, as she patted his pillow. Right now she was pulling at his shoulder to try to get him to move, so she could take the pillow out, and fix it nicely, and put it back, and perhaps cry out and stare, or simply reach down her hand and say, "What's this?" and hold up the hidden book with touching innocence. School is shortened, discipline relaxed, philosophies, histories, languages dropped, English and spelling gradually neglected. Finally, almost completely ignored, life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Why learn anything save pressing buttons, pulling switches, fixing nuts and bolts? Let me fix your pillow, said Mildred. No, whispered Montag. The zipper displaces the button, and man lacks just that much time to think while dressing at dawn, a philosophical hour, and thus a melancholy hour. Mildred said, Here. Get away, said Montag. Life becomes one big pratfall, Montag. Everything bang, boff, and wow. Wow, said Mildred, yanking at the pillow. For God's sake, let me be, cried Montag passionately. Beatty opened his eyes wide. Mildred's hand had frozen behind the pillow. Her fingers were tracing the book's outline, and as the shape became familiar, her face looked surprised, and then stunned, her mouth opened to ask a question. Empty the theatres, save the clowns, and furnish the rooms with glass walls and pretty colours running up and down the walls like confetti, or blood, or sherry, or sauterne. You like baseball, don't you, Montag? Oh, baseball's a fine game. Now, Beatty was almost invisible, a voice somewhere behind a screen of smoke. What's this? Asked Mildred, almost with delight. Montag heaved back against her arms. What's this here? Sit down, Montag shouted. She jumped away, her hands empty. We're talking. Beatty went on as if nothing had happened. You like bowling, don't you, Montag? Bowling, yes. And golf? Oh, golf is a fine game. And basketball? A fine game. Billiards, pool, football? Fine games, all of them. More sports for everyone. Group spirit, fun, and you don't have to think, eh? Organise and super-organise super sports. More cartoons in books, more pictures. The mind drinks less and less. Impatience. Highways full of crowds going somewhere. Nowhere. The gasoline refugee. Towns run into motels, people in nomadic surges from place to place, following the moon tides, living tonight in the room where you slept this noon and I the night before. Mildred went out of the room and slammed the door. The parlour aunts began to laugh at the parlour uncles. Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers, the cat lovers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second-generation Chinese, Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial are not meant to represent any actual painters, cartographers, mechanics anywhere. The bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts, lock up your typewriters. And they did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapioca. Books, so the damned snobbish critics said, were dishwater. No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. And the three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. No. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick, thank God. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You're allowed to read comics, the good old confessions, or trade journals.